April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Caen, France. The sky is a restless canvas of silver clouds streaked with sunlight, the roar of radial engines slicing through the cold air. Oberleutnant Hans Weber, a seasoned Luftwaffe pilot of Jägerschwader 54, grips his Focke-Wulf FW-190's control stick with white-knuckled intensity. His eyes flick between the altimeter and the distant formations of Allied aircraft below. The mission had been routine: intercept the American bomber stream reported over Normandy. Routine, until the unexpected happened. Out of the sun, a single P-47 Thunderbolt appeared, banking sharply to evade a Messerschmitt pursuing it. Its fuselage gleamed under the morning light, robust and unyielding, its turbo-supercharged engine emitting a low, powerful growl that resonated even from 1,000 feet away. Hans's first thought, it's just another fighter. But within seconds, the Thunderbolt's resilience became undeniable. Anti-aircraft fire had riddled the plane with bullets, yet it climbed steadily, shrugged off glancing hits, and executed maneuvers that should have shredded a lesser aircraft. The FW-190, agile and deadly, danced around it, but Hans began to feel a creeping unease. Something about this machine was different. Then it happened. A burst of tracer fire hit Hans's left wing. Alarms blared, instruments flickered. He fought the controls, struggling to keep the FW-190 steady, but the wind of battle was unrelenting. The P-47, though smaller in number, was unyielding, and Hans saw his escape route blocked. The decision came as quickly as the danger: forced landing. Weber spotted a clearing near a farm, the rough field framed by early spring trees, and executed a textbook belly landing, skidding across the uneven terrain with his wheels partially retracted. Dirt and stones kicked up as the plane groaned under the sudden stress. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. As Hans climbed out of the cockpit, the scent of fuel and scorched metal filled the crisp morning air. He took in his surroundings: the distant rumble of American bombers fading, the shouts of local villagers, and, most importantly, the wreckage of the Thunderbolt he had been pursuing. Unlike the delicate, fast-failing fighters he was accustomed to, this plane was intact, almost impervious to the chaos that surrounded it. He walked closer, boots crunching on frozen soil, and ran a hand along the P-47's fuselage. The metal felt thick, purposeful. The radial engine sat enormous, complex, a masterpiece of American engineering. Turbo-superchargers, reinforced cowling, oversized landing gear, all the features combined into a machine that could endure punishment the Luftwaffe planes simply could not. Hans crouched, examining bullet marks and dented panels. He could almost hear the whispered boast of American engineers in its design: build more than you can ever lose. He realized, as he traced the structure with his fingers, that this was not merely a plane, it was a symbol. A stark, physical reminder that Germany's Air Force, once feared across Europe, faced a technological and industrial opponent it could not hope to match. Hans Weber rose to his full height, chest tight with a mixture of admiration and dread. The roar of distant engines reminded him the war was not done, and yet he knew, in that field beside the P-47, that the scales were shifting irreversibly. Hans Weber circled the P-47 slowly, each step revealing another detail that made his heart sink. The Thunderbolt's wings were thick and rugged, braced for the kind of punishment that would have shredded a Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf. The machine guns embedded in the wings, 8.50 caliber Browning M2s, glinted ominously, and he imagined the devastation they could unleash on his formations. He crouched beside the engine, brushing soot and grime from the cowling. The R-2800 double Wasp radial engine sat like a mechanical beast, a labyrinth of cylinders, pistons, and turbochargers. Hans traced the pipes with a gloved hand, trying to comprehend the complexity and sheer power contained within. The turbo-supercharger alone was a marvel: it allowed the aircraft to maintain astonishing speed at altitudes that would leave most Luftwaffe fighters struggling. Hans could not stop comparing it to the engines back home. The BMW 801 powering his FW-190 was excellent, but even the most powerful German engines lacked the sheer endurance, the high-altitude capacity, and the rugged reliability of the American design. This was industrial might incarnate, a machine that could be thrown into combat again and again without breaking, while German aircraft required constant maintenance, often in dangerous, improvised field conditions. His fingers hovered over the cockpit canopy. He wanted to climb in, to feel the controls for himself, but he paused. The seat was large, almost commanding, designed for pilots of all sizes, not the narrow, cramped cockpits he knew from German planes. The gauges and dials were simple, functional, intuitive. A man could understand this instrument panel in minutes, unlike the more intricate, fragile setups of the Luftwaffe. The landing gear caught his attention next. Thick, wide, reinforced tires, capable of withstanding rough fields and hard landings. In contrast, the delicate gear on his FW-190 often failed under the stress of makeshift runways. Hans ran his hand along the hydraulic struts, silently marveling at the precision engineering that had gone into every component. The realization struck him in full force: this was not just superior technology, it was superior production. The Americans had the resources, the factories, the engineers, and the raw materials to build planes like this in numbers that Germany could never match. Each P-47 represented not merely a fighter in the air, but an industrial statement, a declaration of scale that overwhelmed the Luftwaffe's tactical brilliance. Hans Weber stepped back, chest tight, staring at the sleek fuselage. For the first time, he allowed himself to admit it: the Luftwaffe could no longer dominate the skies. Not because their pilots lacked skill, or because German engineering was inadequate, but because the enemy could simply outproduce, outbuild, and outsustain them. The farm around him seemed quiet now, the distant echoes of combat fading into the morning mist. Yet in that silence, Hans felt the weight of a truth that no propaganda could hide: the tide of war in the air was turning, and the mighty Luftwaffe, once a symbol of invincibility, was facing a foe whose industrial and technological power was beyond reckoning. He stared at the P-47, awe and fear intertwined, and whispered under his breath, almost as if confessing to himself, "We cannot win this, not anymore." Hans Weber finally tore his gaze from the P-47 and returned to his FW-190, its fuselage scarred but airworthy. The engines hummed faintly, a reminder that he had survived, yet the exhilaration of the flight had been replaced by a cold, gnawing unease. He climbed back into the cockpit, fingers trembling slightly as he adjusted the straps and checked instruments. Every dial, every lever felt heavier now, weighted by the knowledge he carried. The journey back to his unit was tense and quiet. The familiar French countryside blurred past, green fields and distant villages calm against the chaos of what he had just witnessed in the sky. Hans replayed every maneuver, every glance at the Thunderbolt, and every detail of its construction. By the time he landed at the Jageschwader 54 airfield, the initial shock had solidified into something darker, a realization that could not be ignored. He approached his Staffelkapitän, Hauptmann Karl-Heinz Müller, who was waiting near the hangar, cigarette in hand, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his cap. The usual banter and bravado were absent. Hans's expression carried the gravity of his encounter. "I saw the Thunderbolt up close," Hans said quietly, avoiding the casual tone he knew his superior expected. "It's unlike anything we've faced before." Müller raised an eyebrow, curiosity mixed with skepticism. "You mean the P-47? We've encountered them before." "Solid machines, yes, but hardly invincible." Hans shook his head, the words spilling out faster now. "No. You don't understand. The engine, the armor, the design, it can take punishment we would expect to cripple any German plane. It climbs higher, it flies longer, and they can produce them by the dozens, by the hundreds. Even if we shoot one down, there are 10 more ready to replace it." Silence hung for a moment, broken only by the distant hum of other aircraft and the occasional shout from mechanics. Müller's face hardened as he considered Hans's words, recognizing the tone of someone who had glimpsed the future of aerial warfare, and found it grim. "You're saying, it's not just a plane," Müller muttered. "It's a sign. A sign of what we're up against." Hans nodded. "Exactly. We have skill, yes. Tactics, experience, but they have scale and technology that we simply cannot match. Each P-47 I've seen is a reminder that the Luftwaffe's days of dominance are numbered. Word of Hans Weber's encounter spread quickly through the unit. Pilots and ground crew alike discussed it in hushed tones, a mixture of awe and fear. Some dismissed it, clinging to pride and training, but others, the older, more experienced aces, nodded knowingly. They had long suspected that Germany's air war was entering a dangerous imbalance, but seeing it confirmed in such vivid detail struck deeply. Hans kept returning to the P-47 in his mind. Not as an enemy aircraft, not as a target, but as a symbol of a shifting world. One pilot's forced landing, one close inspection, had crystallized a truth that no report or intelligence briefing could fully convey: the Luftwaffe was no longer facing merely another aircraft or formation. It was facing an industrial and technological juggernaut that Germany could not hope to outpace. By nightfall, Hans lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, the image of the Thunderbolt etched in his mind. Every rivet, every panel, every roar of that powerful engine haunted him. He understood now what would soon become impossible to deny: skill and courage could only go so far when confronted with limitless production and relentless innovation. The following days were a blur of sorties and routine patrols, but for Hans Weber, nothing felt routine anymore. Every flight, every engagement with Allied aircraft brought the memory of the P-47 rushing back with relentless clarity. He watched other pilots maneuver, fired at incoming formations, and yet a part of him could not shake the sobering truth: Germany was being outpaced in the skies, not just tactically, but fundamentally, technologically, and industrially. During a briefing with higher command, Hans was asked to recount his encounter. Maps were laid across tables, markers and chalk tracing flight paths, but Hans spoke not just of numbers or coordinates, but of the aircraft itself. "The P-47 is different," he said, voice measured, almost trembling with the weight of realization. "Its engine endures. Its frame survives hits that would cripple us. And the Americans, they have factories producing them faster than we can destroy them. We cannot fight this indefinitely." The room went quiet. Younger pilots fidgeted nervously, while older officers exchanged glances, some hiding grim nods behind the stoicism of discipline. The truth, spoken aloud, could not be ignored. The Luftwaffe's earlier confidence in technology and tactics was now confronting a stark reality: even the best pilots, the most skilled maneuvers, and the fastest aircraft could not offset the unyielding output of American industry. That evening, Hans walked alone along the edge of the airfield. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, clouds streaked with the last light of sunset. He imagined the P-47 flying high above Europe, engines roaring, pilots aboard confident in their machine's endurance. It was a haunting vision, one that carried the weight of inevitability. He realized that the Luftwaffe was entering a phase it could not reverse, not with bravery, not with ingenuity, and certainly not with dwindling resources. He thought back to the moment he first touched the Thunderbolt, to the feel of its fuselage under his gloves, the turbocharged engine that seemed almost alive with potential. That moment had shifted something inside him. It was not just fear, it was clarity. Germany was no longer merely fighting for territory or dominance, it was struggling to keep pace in a war that increasingly depended on production, technology, and the capacity to replace losses faster than they could be inflicted. In the days and weeks that followed, Hans carried the memory of that P-47 like a quiet burden. Every mission was a reminder of the gap widening above the clouds. Pilots discussed tactics, formations, and kills, but Hans now measured their chances in terms of numbers, in the relentless churn of American factories, in the durability of an aircraft that refused to break. He realized that the encounter was more than personal, it was symbolic. One plane, one inspection, one pilot's encounter encapsulated the broader truth of the air war: the Luftwaffe, once an unstoppable force, was being eclipsed by an industrial and technological machine far beyond its control. And for Hans Weber, that truth could not be denied, no matter how much courage or skill he could muster in the skies of Europe. He paused at the edge of the airfield, the wind tugging at his uniform, and looked toward the horizon where the clouds met the fading sun. In that quiet, reflective moment, he whispered to himself, not as a soldier, but as a witness to history: "We are finished, not for lack of effort, but for lack of numbers, of machines, of endurance. Weeks passed, and the skies over Europe grew even more crowded with American aircraft. Bomber streams thudded relentlessly toward German cities and factories, escorted by formations of P-47s and P-51 Mustangs. Each encounter Hans Weber flew was a reminder of that day at the farm, of the machine that had crystallized the future of the air war in his mind. He observed younger pilots, eager, fearless, full of bravado, yet he could see the subtle cracks in confidence that the Americans' machines induced. Every Thunderbolt they saw was not just an opponent, it was a lesson in industrial might, in technological resilience, in a reality Germany could not manufacture fast enough to meet. Hans often revisited his own notes, sketches, and mental observations of the P-47. He analyzed its engine, its armor, its armament, everything that made it a symbol of a growing imbalance. And slowly, he understood that his encounter was not an isolated moment but a microcosm of a larger truth. Germany's air war had passed its tipping point. The Luftwaffe could no longer rely on tactics alone. Pilots could no longer compensate for the sheer quantity and durability of American aircraft. Even among his comrades, whispers of the Thunderbolt's superiority spread. Reports, initially dismissed, gained credibility as repeated encounters confirmed what Hans had seen firsthand. The stories of pilots returning with torn planes and failing engines contrasted sharply with the Americans' unbroken machines. Each Thunderbolt that soared overhead became a symbol of inevitability. Hans Weber himself began to write more cautiously, adding detailed accounts of American aircraft capabilities, engine performance, and structural resilience to his reports. His observations became part of the larger intelligence record, used by commanders to reassess strategy. Yet he knew, deep down, that no report, however meticulous, could alter the fundamental reality. Germany had been outmatched not only in numbers but in the very means to sustain a prolonged air campaign. In quiet moments, Hans would think back to that spring morning, standing beside the P-47 in the muddy French field. He remembered the metallic hum of the engine, the solid weight of the fuselage beneath his hands, the quiet yet undeniable assertion that the Luftwaffe's time of supremacy was ending. That day, one aircraft had delivered a lesson no battle could fully teach. The war in the skies was no longer just about skill or courage, it was about endurance, industry, and the power to replace what was lost. By the summer of 1943, the Luftwaffe was already feeling the strain, and Hans knew, as he climbed into his FW-190 for another sortie, that every future engagement would carry the shadow of that realization. The Thunderbolt, in its quiet, relentless way, had shown him the truth. The Luftwaffe was no longer the dominant force it had once been, and the skies of Europe were tilting irrevocably toward the Americans. Hans Weber flew on, but the lesson lingered in every maneuver, every climb, every dive. One plane, one forced landing, one close inspection had reshaped his understanding of the air war. In that moment, beside a downed P-47 in a quiet French field, history had whispered a truth: skill and valor could not outweigh industrial might. And the Luftwaffe, for all its past glory, was finished.